We welcome you once again to our study, our continuing study of the Book of Mormon. Here in our roundtable discussion, my name is Robert Millet, a member of the Department of Ancient Scripture at BYU, and with me are my friends and colleagues, Professor Todd Parker and Brian Hauglid. Brethren, we have a formidable task on our hands here. We've come to that section of the Book of Mormon that deals with war. And let's begin with chapter 43 of Alma, and let's ask ourselves some fundamental questions. Given the limited space in the Book of Mormon, given the fact that more than one of the writers indicates I only have so much room, why take the time to devote nearly, 60 pages of our text, 50 to 60 pages?
20 chapters.
20 chapters. Mm-hmm. To wars, to warfare, to strategies. Why? Why the time?
Well, personally, I think the writers also say they've seen our day. And I think they put this about physical warfare in here that we could extract from that how to fight spiritual battles in our spiritual warfare. Elder Widsoe said, a wise person will be able to see the spiritual meaning behind physical things in life, and I think we could draw from these. And President Benson, speaking to the Boise Institute, the young adults there, he said, we must be aware of the devil's devious designs. He'll attack our weak spots, and so we should be aware of them. I think that's what Mormon's probably helping us do here.
Brian?
Well, I think that along with what Todd was saying about the spiritual implications of this, I think if we just read it for tactics and military strategies, and I think we're going to be missing the point of what we should be getting out of this. We've got so much good counsel here on preparation and trying to be ahead of the opposition and fortifying ourselves and the things that would really count in a spiritual battle.
Thanks. I think those are good comments. Let me ask this question. Does the Book of Mormon, in any way, from your perspective, provide for us an attitude toward war that is helpful in any way?
I think it definitely does. I think we'll look at some verses there where we're not supposed to enter a war offensively, but we're supposed to prepare ourselves and only enter it in a defensive manner. And I think we can see examples of how they choose leaders, how they approach things. And you've got Moroni who takes lives, but he's very, very spiritual, and he won't take them. He won't kill drunk Lamanites. He won't. He gives the weapons back to Zarahemna's army when he won't make a covenant. So it'll be more of an equal fight. And I think we got several things that teach us about how we should approach this, what attitude we should have.
Okay. And I know that Todd, I think you have the quotation I'm thinking of with you. President David O. McKay during World War II gave a statement. I think it'd be important to read at least portions of that statement for our viewing audience, because I think this is a very strong declaration as to where we are. Nobody wants to get into war, but I think President McKay explains something very significant, the difference between starting and entering war.
Right, and this is President McKay conference, April 1942. He said, "We see that war is incompatible with Christ's teachings. The gospel of Christ is the gospel of peace. War is the antithesis and produces hate. There are, however, two conditions which may justify a truly Christian man to enter. Mind I say, you enter, not begin a war. One, an attempt to dominate and deprive another of his free agency, and two, loyalty to his country. Possibly a third, namely defense of a weak nation that's being unjustly crushed. by a strong and ruthless one.
Okay.
And there's also, we probably noticed that the brethren will come out with statements when there's a need. When there's legislation about same-sex marriage, they come out with a proclamation on the family. So there was also a statement when President Grant was president, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And so just a part of that, this was a statement by the First Presidency at the General Conference, April 6, 1942. We believe in being subjects to king, presidents, rulers, magistrates, and obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. Latter-day Saint must give allegiance to his sovereign and render its loyal service when called thereto. And then he said, the church is and must be against war. But then this, when constitutional law calls the manhood of the church into the armed service of any country to which they owe allegiance, their highest civic duty requires they meet that call. If, hearkening to that call and obeying those in command over them, they shall take the lives of those who fight against them, that will not make of them murderers.
That's excellent. That's excellent. 42.
Uh-huh.
Brian, it seems to me in the Book of Mormon, one of the things we see throughout the whole text is God raising up key personalities when they're so desperately needed. I think as I look at these chapters 43 through 62, I think of Moroni. What are your impressions of Moroni? What do you see in Moroni, Captain Moroni?
Yes. Well, as we know from chapter 43 here, we know that he's the leader of all the Nephite armies at the young age of 25 years old, which is remarkable in and of itself, to be a general at that age. And we see him as an inspirational leader, a visionary man, one who is focused on those righteous principles and goals that are in line with Father in heaven.
Which, by the way, I think is a very significant point we ought to make here, and that is one of the messages of the Book of Mormon, and it's a haunting one, is the absolute necessity for people appointing to political and military positions men who have the spirit of prophecy and revelation.
Absolutely.
People who are, or we would say, people who are living moral and upright lives to the extent that they could enjoy the light of Christ, the influence of the Holy Ghost in the making of these very difficult decisions.
Absolutely, yes.
I think along with that, it does say in 3 Nephi chapter 3, verse 19, that they appointed men with the spirit of prophecy and revelation, but John also says the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. Whereas the Lamanites in Alma chapter 43, they'd use Nephite dissenters who were of a more murderous disposition, and that would help stir up anger and hatred towards the Nephites.
Okay. Continue, Brian.
Well, maybe just focusing on the visionary aspect of Moroni for a moment here. Moroni was always a step ahead of the Lamanites. When they'd go to battle, Moroni would equip his soldiers with armor and breastplates, and as opposed to the other side there, the Lamanites, they would be naked and they would suffer greatly because of that. Later on, the Lamanites would come with the armor and the breastplates, and what in Moroni, he's not been just sitting around doing nothing. He's now got fortifications built up, and then they come in, and it says in the scriptures they are astonished at what he's done. So he's very visionary, always a step ahead.
You're talking about really something similar to what's described in the Pearl of Great Price in regard to Enoch, where he was called a seer because he could see things not visible to the natural eye.
Yes, that's exactly
right.
And
seers in our day, we're led by 15 seers who always seem to know when things are coming long before they come.
Yeah. And there's a statement in Alma 48, verse 17, that describes Moroni.
Go ahead.
It's kind of reminds me a little bit of Moses. Would that all were prophets. Verse 17 in chapter 48. Yea, verily, verily, I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men.
It's not bad.
That's not bad.
And that's Mormon writing, and he was impressed enough to name his son Moroni.
You see that, and the tribute there is not just the fact, it's not just a tribute to his military genius. It's a tribute to his morality, his decency, his character, his spirituality.
Yeah, and that's all listed in verses 11 through 13 there.
Yeah. You know what I think of Moroni, Brian? I think one of the things that impresses me, as you indicate, he's always one step ahead. Look at chapter 43, verse 30. And he also knowing, Moroni, that it was the only desire of the Nephites to preserve their lands and their liberty and their church, therefore he thought it no sin that he should defend them by stratagem. It seems Moroni's effort, using strategic means to accomplish his ends, was always for the purpose of saving lives on both sides. I mean, this is a man who not only wants to save his own people from dying, he's doing everything he can to keep the Lamanites from dying. He's trying to get this war over with the least amount of blood being shed.
It's interesting, verse 29, just above that, you see the Lamanite motive. It was their intention to destroy their brethren, to subject them and bring them into bondage, the reverse of Moroni's motive.
Mm-hmm. And of course, what we see through this whole thing, I mean, one of the lessons through the Book of Mormon is when those times come that the Nephites allow themselves to be more driven by power and control than by defense and protection, the blessings of the Lord do not rest upon them when they go to war. Anything else you want to say about Moroni, Brian?
Well, just on that verse that we read in verse 17, just following that verse, we don't want to forget that there's others that are looked at as being very powerful men, such as in verse 18, that Moroni was a man like unto Ammon, and the son of Mosiah, and the other sons of Mosiah, and also Alma and his sons, for they were all men of God. And then in 19, Helaman and his brethren were no less serviceable unto them than was Moroni. We want to remember that.
That's good. It's very important for Mormon to get that in there, that concept that I once heard President Marion G. Romney teach, of how critical it is for each of us to guard and protect our portion of the battle line. And he said, I pray that I may always be found defending my section of the line, the battle line.
You know, somebody with that much power, too, that their ego could run wild a little bit. And in 43:23, Moroni doesn't just go on his own. He consults the prophet Alma to inquire of the Lord what he should do. Mm-hmm. So he's not just trying to control this all alone.
Let's go look at chapter 43. Let's read starting with verse 9. Todd, read for us 9 and 10, if you will.
Now this was the design of the Nephites, was to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, and also their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. For they knew that if they should fall into the hands of the Lamanites, that whosoever should worship God in spirit and in truth, the true and the living God, the Lamanites would destroy.
Flip over, if you will, to that same chapter, brethren, to what I consider to be supportive, powerfully supportive of what you've just read. Brian, would you read for us verses 45 through 47?
Nevertheless, the Nephites were inspired by a better cause, for they were not fighting for monarchy nor power, but they were fighting for their homes and their liberties, their wives and their children and their all, yea, for their rights of worship and their church.
Here's where it gets very interesting, and that is this concept the Book of Mormon introduces, not just of our agreement to be involved, but our duty to be involved. Okay?
And they were doing that which they felt was the duty which they had owed to their God. For the Lord had said unto them, and also unto their fathers, that inasmuch as ye are not guilty of the first offense, neither the second, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain by the hands of your enemies. And again the Lord has said that, ye shall defend your families even unto bloodshed. Therefore, for this cause were the Nephites contending with the Lamanites to defend themselves and their families and their lands, their country and their rights and their religion.
See, that's an important concept. Not just that you really ought to take care of your family. That's why I'll let you go to war. But it's your duty to do so. The concept of duty to God was to uphold their land for righteous purposes.
Also in verse 46, where he says, "Inasmuch you're not guilty of the first offense, neither the second," the Lord amplifies that in section 98 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where he says, if people of any nation, tongue, or people should proclaim war against them, they should first lift a standard of peace unto that people, nation, or tongue, and you, in other words, you lift the standard of liberty, and you try not to enter the war, but if you have to, then the Lord will be on your side. And he says that several times throughout these chapters.
Excellent. Todd, we've talked a little bit about how the Nephites chose their leaders. Comment a little more about how the Lamanites chose theirs.
Well, over in Alma 43, verses about 6 through 8, this is the section where Zarahemnah is the Lamanite leader and Moroni is the Nephite leader. Verse 6 says, "Now as the Amalekites were of a more wicked and murderous disposition than the Lamanites were in and of themselves, therefore Zarahemnah appointed chief captains over the Lamanites, and they were all Amalekites or Zoramites, and he did this that he might preserve their hatred towards the Nephites, to bring them into subjection. For behold, his designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites." So he had Nephite dissenters as the leaders to preserve the hatred. And it's still true. If you want to get the worst antagonists against the church are not people of other religions, but people who have dissented from the church, and they're the ones that are the most violently opposed to what we're doing, and that's how they chose their leaders. And then the Nephites chose somebody with the spirit of prophecy and revelation or the testimony of Jesus. Interesting contrast.
It really is. It really is. Talk to us a little bit, Todd, if you will, about what do you see by way of symbolism in terms of Moroni's use of armor, the armor of his soldiers? He obviously, as Brian has pointed out, equips his soldiers. He prepares them for battle. Say more about that.
Well, President Lee came to BYU back in 1954 and gave a talk entitled "The Whole Armor of God," and he showed the symbolism of the armor. Now, in section 27 of the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about a future sacrament meeting at Adam-on-Diamond, and talks about the resurrected beings that will be there, plus others who could be there, and the qualification is to put on this spiritual armor. So President Lee said this in interpreting what that armor was. He said, "We have 4 parts of the body that are the most vulnerable to the powers of darkness. The loins, typifying our virtue or our chastity." See, our midsection where reproductive organs are, that need to be protected physically, but also that represents our chastity, and we need to protect that. The heart, typifying our conduct. We need to surround ourselves with things that can protect what we will be doing. Our feet, our goals or objectives in life, so we need to be able to be on the path that leads us to where we want to be, and our head, our thoughts. So the spiritual armor talked about in section 27 is to protect our chastity, our conduct, our goals, and our thinking, so we will not fall prey to the fiery darts of the adversary.
Good. Brian, when we think, Todd's applied this in general, take the concept of Moroni's use of stratagem. Apply that for us to our day, the use of strategy.
Well, I think Moroni is exemplifying that we need to realize that we'll think of Amalickiah. I mean, Amalickiah, you can't say that he was stupid. You can't say that he was dumb. You can't say that he didn't have some real brains behind what he was trying to do there. And you needed a man like Moroni and men like him to stand up to him and to create some sort of strategy to overcome him. Well, it's the same thing for us. As in our spiritual battles, the world offers many complex, sophisticated ways of getting at us, whether it be through media or whatever it might be. We need to be on top of that. We need to be wary of those things, cautious, and be you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
As far as
it reminds me, in fact, of the New Testament teachings of Jesus. That I don't mean to be crass about this, but what he says essentially is, my followers, my soldiers ought to be as bright or brighter than those of the world. In other words, if you were half as smart and had half as much ingenuity and half as much energy and enthusiasm as the enemies do, and half as much brains, we could defeat them. And I think the Lord is constantly calling upon us to use a strategic warfare in fighting against the devil. I know you made a comment to me once about how it isn't just one area.
Yeah, I was just thinking of in Alma chapter 50, Mormon explains how in verse 1, Moroni didn't stop making preparations for war even when they weren't right in the thick of battle. But Alma chapter 50 lists multiple lines of defense. There's heaps of earth, there's ridges, there's timbers, there's pickets, there's towers, there's rocks, and there's stones. And so I think we can learn from this. Sometimes our youth will say, well, we want to be chaste, be morally clean, so our line of defense is we won't do anything wrong. Well, that's only one. They need to add some other ones. We won't steady date before the guy's mission. We won't be alone together. We won't go into bedrooms. And that's basically what the honor code is around BYU. It's trying to list multiple lines of defense to keep us protected.
Yeah, we can't just be unilateral in our approach to facing a multifaceted enemy.
That's right. That's right. And Moroni here, he's not saying, okay, let's we don't have to work so hard on getting that done, or we don't have to. Well, he is right down the line on we've got to do this, and he's not creating any openings for the enemy there at all.
Yeah, and I like Mormon's wording, verse 12, and thus Moroni with his armies, which did increase daily because of the assurance of protection, cut off the strength of the power of the Lamanites.
That's excellent.
That is good.
In the time we have left, let's focus on Moroni's title of liberty. It seems to me there are those items, those instruments, those devices in the Book of Mormon that show up, whether they be the Liahona or in the Old Testament, the brazen serpent. Mm-hmm. But there are always these physical standards, ensigns, if you will, that the great ones use to remind people. What do you make of Moroni's title of liberty? What does it seem to be about to you, Brian?
To me, it's more than just a rallying call.
So it's not just let's have a pep rally.
No. I think there's more in the way of covenant making going on there. Maybe even a renewal of covenants with the people, and especially with God. Yeah. That they are going to obey Him and follow the direction that is given to them through Moroni, of course. So it's much more than like you said, a pep rally.
Yeah. Todd, would you read for us chapter 46, verses 19 through 22?
And when Moroni had said these words, he went forth among the people, waving the rent part of his garment in the air, that all might see the writing which he had written upon the rent part, and crying with a loud voice, saying, Behold, whosoever will maintain this title upon the land, let him come forth in the strength of the Lord, and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion, that the Lord God might bless them. And it came to pass that when Moroni had proclaimed these words, behold, the people came running together with their armor girded about their loins, rending their garment in token, or as a covenant, that they would not forsake the Lord their God, or, in other words, if they should transgress the commandments of God or fall into transgression, and be ashamed to take upon them the name of Christ, the Lord should rend them even as they had rent their garments. Now this was the covenant which they made, and they cast their garments at the feet of Moroni, saying, We covenant with our God, that we shall be destroyed even as our brethren in the land northward, he's referring to the Jaredites, if we shall fall into transgression, yea, he may cast us at the feet of our enemies, even as we have cast our garments at thy feet to be trodden underfoot, if we shall fall into transgression.
You know, it reminds me of that wonderful Old Testament illustration, and maybe we can close with this, that the Lord always provides a means for his people to escape destruction, be it physical or spiritual, and that he'll never leave us alone. That wonderful occasion where Elisha the prophet is housed, as it were, with the young lad, and the Syrian armies are surrounding them. And as he wakes up in the morning, the young lad sees that they are surrounded by the enemies. And the answer of Elisha, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them," is a powerful message. But I think also the thing that really touches me, the young man, it's as if he looks out and says, I can count, and there ain't but two of us. And then that beautiful message that comes through as Elisha prays and says, "Oh Lord, open his eyes that he may see." And it says the eyes of the young lad were opened, and he saw the chariots of Israel, the horses, the flaming horses in flames, who were there to protect his servants. I think that's a phenomenal message to us that comes from the Book of Mormon, that we are never alone when we're on the Lord's errand, and when He's with us, we're never in the minority.
And in Alma 50:23, it says, "Behold, there never was a happier time, even though it was right in the middle of this time of war."
That's a good place to end.